What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Racially Speaking, where we have real and honest conversations about race as it's viewed through the lenses of faith, family, and vocation. As always, I'm David Phipps, your host, and today my guest is my friend Alethea Lamberson. Alethea is a fellow crew staffer and fiery, amazing podcast host herself, and I'm going to let her talk about that here in a second. Alethea wears a bunch of different hats. She lives down in Atlanta now. Sadly, she used to live up here by me in the NRV, but she's doing bigger and better things down the ATL. So, Alethea, thank you so much for doing this. How you doing?
Yeah, what's up, y'all? It's good to be on the podcast. I'm doing pretty good right now. I did some yoga a little bit ago, nice. To get the body loosened up a little bit after a little bit of a stressful afternoon. But I've had a couple of good days, and those seem far and few between. So I'm claiming those, naming that, and holding on to that. So I'm doing okay right now.
That's awesome. I'm glad you're in a good headspace for the podcast. I'll take that as a compliment.
For sure. Yeah.
All right. Like I said, you wear a lot of different hats. I kind of don't like when people tell me I'm busy, but you are properly busy, in a lot of good ways. So I just specifically want to give you time to talk about the podcast that you and your friend Matthew host called The Roll Down over as part of the Chasing Justice Network. I'll just say, and I'm not just saying this, phenomenal. Everyone
Thank you.
should absolutely listen to it. If you don't listen, I don't even care if you listen to this, listen to
No, you should listen to this.
Listen to The Roll Down. Incredible. Y'all are, man, it's so good. I've gone through the gamut of emotion, I think, laughing, tears, just learned so much. People of color feel, which is my heart for this podcast, but y'all's podcast, I know people of color feel seen by y'all, and it's so informative. Anybody that wants to listen, allies, other people of color, y'all are doing incredible stuff over there. So tell us a little bit about the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, David. It's always really encouraging when people reflect back, how they experience what we're talking about. Matthew and I, this has been the summer will be 3 years, but summer of 2018. So Matthew and I served together in some different spaces on staff. And so we were here in Atlanta, actually, on a retreat, a planning and rest retreat with our team, our core team. And we're out at dinner and he was like, Leith, let's start a podcast. And I was like, okay, sure. It's a cool idea. Podcasts were kind of becoming the thing. But I was like, how would we do that? Cause I have opinions about things. I like to talk about stuff. People that know me know that. I have things to say, but I never could kind of grasp, how do we put it into the format of what we listen to when we hear other podcasts? And so we both just said, that this is a dream, let's keep talking about it. And so Matthew would kind of bring it up every now and then, over the course of the next year and a half. And I'd be like, it sounds great, but there's a lot going on just with the team I was serving on at the time, for Matthew as well. And then we were doing something together for the team that we now both serve with. And it was in that time. So it was summer of last year, the awesome summer 2020. And, then we both realized we were in a transition to join the executive team of the team the group that we were working with. And so we were like, wow, we're going to be working together more. Maybe this is the time. So then it got to be okay, we're ready, but who's going to do the sound? Matthew and I are not technologically savvy. And so it was we got to get someone to edit this. We don't know what we're doing. So we just kept talking about it. And then one day he hit me up and was like, hey, my friend connected me to this guy, Caleb. He just graduated. He wants to get into some sound mixing engineering stuff. Let's meet with him. Cool. So this was in August. And so met with Caleb and he was like, yeah, I'd love to volunteer and do it for free. And we're like, oh,
the price is right.
Okay. That's free is great. Yeah. Free is great. Okay.
That's amazing.
You're trying to figure it out. We don't really know what's good quality either, but let's roll with it, So then at that same time, one of our friends had emailed us about a grant to apply for. I saw the information. I was like, yeah, this doesn't apply to us. Matthew, and we hadn't even talked about it. I didn't know Matthew got the email, but Matthew's like, hey, did you see that email? I was like, yeah, I didn't really think anything of it. He's like, oh, I wrote up a grant proposal. And I was like, oh, okay. So I read it and I was like, this is phenomenal. This captures what we're about, who we want to target. We say in the intro of our podcast, the Roll Down podcast is a space for people of color to be known and seen and guidance for those in the pursuit of justice. And this grant it was called a Semester of Justice grant. And so we apply and I'm like, okay, God, what's going to happen with this, you know? And then like a week later, we find out we've gotten a $10,000 grant. And it was in that moment that I was like, oh, okay, God, you really want this to happen. Like,
now you gotta
Caleb,
do it.
that was great. But like, we were about to come out of pocket for all this stuff. Right. And so, and again, we didn't know. It was like, we'll get like cheapish, decent microphone if we can, you know, but like figure out our budget. And now God just took away any barrier financially for us. And so that for me was like, oh, this is for real. Like we get to do this. And so we were able to get good equipment, you know, and even we got to pay Caleb a few times, you know, for the work that he's been doing. And then over the course, so that was in end of August. And so with the grant, we had this timeline. And so we were like, okay, we're going to launch in December. But then in that time, so during the fall, we were talking with Sandra Van Opstel, who is a co-founder and executive director of the Chasing Justice Network. And it went from us asking her to be on the podcast to her saying, hey, do you guys want to be a part of the Chasing Justice podcast network? And we were like, what's that even mean? We didn't even know Chasing Justice had that. And so she shared the vision with us. And Matthew and I, it was one of those moments where it's like, well, we haven't proven ourselves. So why would you want to bring us this close? You guys don't even really know us, her and Tyler Burns. And in this meeting we had with them in October, they were like, oh, we want y'all to be a part of the network. Like we want to come behind you, support you, give you whatever you need. And we walked away from that. Like I had to fight back tears in that meeting because it felt like one of the first moments, at least in what I can remember in my adult life, where I didn't feel like I had to prove myself in order to earn what felt like so significant. And Matthew felt very similar. Like we were just kind of in awe. And it took us a little while even to I feel like, internalize that. Like, while they see something in us, like Tyler would be praying for us or be like, I'm seeing these things about y'all. And so just the incredible support. And so we got to adjust our timeline a little bit with that too, which was nice. And had the backing of the grant folks. And so then we released, in January. But we had no idea what was to come, upon releasing our first episode. Cause
how's it been going?
Yeah, it's, we just dropped our 12th episode today, actually, which has been pretty wild that we're over halfway through. Yeah. And so, we released our trailer, I think it was January 8th. So that was, like 2 days after a whole, attempted coup and insurrection at the Capitol. Yeah. And so it was wild because that happened on a Wednesday and we were dropping our trailer that Friday, or maybe our first episode, I get them all mixed up. But I had to get on Instagram Live the day after with Tyler Burns to talk about the podcast. And I texted Tyler before, I don't have anything in me to promote right now. I'm not trying to promote. I'm what the hell just happened? But yeah, so episode dropped and then it's just been crazy. 12 episodes in. I don't know. Matthew looks at all the stuff. We were at 7,300 downloads a couple weeks ago. That's been crazy. And then in that time too, we've had people join us. So we have a social media marketing, Jaslyn, she's incredible, senior in college. She works with 2 other podcasts and she's like, y'all are well ahead of the norm with when you released and where you're at with downloads and people's engagement. Awesome. She's elevated our social media game. As soon as she came on, people are like, wow, your social media is so good. We're like, yeah, it's not us. And then another guy, Cam, came on to do our graphics. We have a series coming that we've been recording. And so he just sent us today the graphics. And we're like, wow, this is incredible, the way you have captured this. And so Cam's phenomenal. And then my friend Alex joined the team as our assistant because she's so good with admin and organizing. Awesome. So she's keeping us all together. And then our friend Emma, she's a regular on the show. We kind of, or the podcast, not the show, but she's a regular on there. And we call her our in-house seminarian because she's about to graduate with her seminary degree after 4 years of seminary. And so we just kind of dig into some different parts of scripture or stuff like that. And so we've been, I would say, overwhelmed with the response, not just the downloads. That's cool, but we don't define success by how many people have subscribed or download. We see that and we're really grateful for that. But for me, I'll say for me, I could probably speak this for Matthew too, but the success, so to speak, is the DMs, the texts, the calls I've gotten, that Matthew's gotten, that we've both gotten of what God is doing. As Matthew and I honestly share, we are on a journey and we make that really clear. We're deconstructing and it's really disorienting and it's really challenging. And then we know that God has been really kind to us to provide us with relationships with phenomenal people. And so we want to share that with others. And so it's just been wild. We did a Liberating Women series. So March was Women's History Month. And so we adjusted our schedule not by choice per se, with some stuff that was happening behind the scenes, but then it actually worked out. And we're like, we'll just release, there's 5 Wednesdays in March. So we release the second Wednesday, we release every Wednesday, or we release on Wednesdays. We're like, let's just release every Wednesday after the first week and of our series. It was a 4-part series. And so it was our first series. And I mean, we got into it. We talked about liberating women from oppressive history. We talked about spiritual abuse. And so like addressing hyper complementarian stuff and the role of women in the church. We talked about unhealthy masculinity and how that leads to toxic masculinity and gender-based violence. Like we got into it. We talked about purity culture and colonized femininity. So it's like topics that Matthew and I, we have tried to address or been addressing in some of our different spaces, being in a lot of white evangelical contexts that have been problematic or really harmful, both for us and those that we love and know, and just kind of more broadly. And so we want to create space, a lot of it for people of color who have been in or are in white evangelical contexts that are really challenging. So
again, like I said, it's phenomenal. And I mean, I think everything you're saying or you said about it and how people have received it, y'all's heart for it. Personally, speaking as one person listening to it, I feel all that. Like I said, I mean, I vividly remember, the first 3 episodes, but episode 3. And then I remember I listened to some of the women's series with your friend, his last name's Howard. I forget his first name.
Kyle Howard. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Just jaw-dropping, phenomenal thoughts that he had. And so I just encourage everyone to listen to it. I've learned so much from it. And man, I mean, it's incredible. So y'all,
I appreciate that.
Y'all are crushing it. Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. I got one more, a little bit heavier question for you. And then we're gonna try and have a little more fun, and not that we're not going to go hard, but talk a little sports, because I know that's one of your many wheelhouses. But while I had you on, I did want to ask, so we're, I think, literally a week out from hearing the verdict of the Derek Chauvin trial last week. How are you doing, or how were you doing maybe when the verdict came out, and then how are you doing a week later?
Yeah. A week later, I feel like so much has happened since then. So it's almost kind of like, oh, that happened. We felt something. And now we wait for like 2 months before the sentencing. And because all these other things have happened since then. So feels, that's kind of the trajectory of our country. It's like constant, it's almost daily tragedy. So I'm affected in different ways, not because of the verdict. But yeah, a week ago, I was sitting right where I'm at. So I'm sitting at my desk. It's where I do podcasting and work. And I was actually on a call. One of my teammates was doing a group debrief for this cultural competency assessment that we're all certified in. And so I'm on the group call because I was seeing it modeled. And then I get a text from another coworker in our Slack. And she's like, the verdict's coming out around 4:30. And it was 4:15. As soon as she sent the text, I was done. I was so distracted. Like I was on the call, but I was not listening. So I'm pulling up YouTube. I'm pulling up, what stream can I listen to? Like I needed to know. And so, it took them, it was like 5:02 Eastern time, I think, when the verdict finally came out. And I remember us sitting here so anxious. And it was an interesting experience. Social media can be really problematic, as we all know, but it can be really rich. It can be really refreshing. It can be really good community at the same time. And what I was experiencing leading up to the verdict being read was this like sense of like collectiveness in the Black community on Twitter of like all the anxiousness. Like we were feeling it together. Like we assume it'll be not guilty. Like I was looking at the charges and I was like reading about the severity and I'm like, oh, it'll be the lowest one, like the manslaughter, like there's no way he'll get convicted of the other 2 that are way more extreme. Now, granted, what he did was extreme, but like there's no way, right? Because this doesn't happen. And so the verdict, the first one gets read and I heard guilty and my body reacted. Like I was just I think there was like shock, like, oh my gosh. And then the second one, guilty. And then the third, and I just was in shock. And so I'm sitting there and I'm like, what is happening? And so I'm on Twitter. I'm refreshing Twitter every 2 seconds because I need to process in some way with other Black people. And so I'm sitting there and people are having such an emotional response. Like people are like a collective sigh of relief is what it felt like initially. And then I was sitting here probably like 20 or so minutes later, and I'm like, why haven't I cried? Like I see people on social media like, oh, I'm in tears or I'm sobbing. And I was feeling emotional, but I wasn't crying. And I cry. Like I'm not someone who doesn't want to cry. I'll try to fight it sometimes, but I legitimately wasn't. And I'm like, what is going on? So then I like go out in my living room and I turn on the news and I'm watching more of the coverage. And then the tears start to come. And then I'm Marco poloing with one of my best friends. She's white, but she's a really safe person for me. I can be very honest with her. And she starts asking me like, hey, whatever you want to share, if you want to share anything at all, like, I just want you to know I'm here. And it was just something about the safety even of getting through a screen on Marco Polo, but I started sobbing. So I came in my room and it was just like the ugly, nasty, snotty sob. And I was like, okay, here it comes. Like I'm releasing all of what I'm holding with this verdict, and what this means, because it was historic. It's significant. This is a very rare, sadly, feat in our country where a cop would go outside the bounds of what it means to actually care for people, human beings, and is being held accountable. And so it was very quickly like, this isn't justice, it's accountability. That's what accountability looks like. Justice means to make right. And so there's no making right. George Floyd doesn't get his breath back and come back to life. His daughter is going to grow up without a dad. Men can come into her life and father her, but she will grow up without her actual father. When she gets old enough, she's going to be seeing and hearing about, oh yeah, your dad changed potentially the course of history in the US, but he lost his life at the cost of it. And not because he was this martyr as Nancy Pelosi made him out to be. No, he was murdered in the streets. And so that's not justice that Derek Chauvin was convicted of all three counts. It's accountability. But then I really quickly went from this like sigh of relief and like, oh my gosh, like I can try to like move past the shock a little bit to I got frustrated. I was like, why am I frustrated? And then it hit me that all the names started running through my head. So Tamir Rice and Breonna Taylor. There's so many, oh my gosh. Oscar, oh my gosh, I'm blanking right now.
Grant.
About out in Oakland. Oscar Grant, thank you. I posted on my Instagram story like a list of names of Black people who have been murdered by the police. Sandra Bland. So many. The list is long. They were acquitted or they were never even charged. The footage was reviewed and there was like, there's no charges to bring in this case. And so I became frustrated pretty quickly that we don't get to like assume, like Black people don't get to assume like, oh, because Derek Chauvin was convicted, like this will happen. No, that's not the case. And how many Black families will never experience this level of accountability? And this is historic, right? It's not just in the last 10 years or 20 years in our country. So it was a mixture of emotions to try to process that. And then it got to the point where I had to get off social media because the collective processing was really good for a little bit. Yeah. And then some white folks started acting crazy per the norm. And so I was like, and this is my exit from social media. And the news about Ma'Khia Bryant had been released at that time. And like an hour later, and Columbus, Ohio is about, depending on where you are, 30 to 45 minutes from my hometown. And Columbus police have killed a number of Black people over the last like 6 months. And so I was actually home in December when Andre Hill Jr. was killed by the police, murdered. And so it was just like, okay, we don't even get a moment to actually try to catch our breath because here we're hit with it again. So it was this moment of like, wow, this can happen. It needs to continue to happen, but what do we do with all the ones where it hasn't happened? So it's an interesting thing to be Black in this country and to be aware, I think it was James Baldwin talks about like the double consciousness of Black people where, you're aware, but enraged all at the same time because you see what's happening. You have this lived experience, a collective experience. So yeah, it was a shock that it actually happened, but then quickly turned into a mixture of emotions that, again, I think I'm still holding today to some extent, but grateful that there is accountability, not because the system worked. I think that's the other thing that people need to understand. Because I started seeing people on social media say that like, oh, the system worked. I'm like, no, the system is set up to do what it's been doing. It's actually there now people are functioning and recognizing like this is wrong. And we have an opportunity to do something right and just to an extent. So
is it too far? Is it fair to say that we shouldn't even refer to the verdict as one of justice, that we should use a different word like accountability?
I personally don't call it justice. And I'm learning even from other activists, as I was watching some of them who are in the trenches day after day after day with this type of stuff. And so I follow a lot of them on Twitter just so I can get perspective. And a number of them kept saying, like, this isn't justice. We keep saying, like, justice for George Floyd. And everyone kept saying justice would be that he would be breathing. Justice would be that there wouldn't be a system that allows this to even happen. And then it takes a 17-year-old filming on her phone. So now the trauma she has to live through, and her 9-year-old brother or cousin was with her that she was just taking out to get a snack. It takes the world watching. It takes a worldwide protest for that.
Yes.
So I wouldn't call that justice. I would call it accountability. And that's some of the language I'm trying, and even how we talk about justice. And so, which is a whole nother, conversation, but that I'm still learning. So I'm using that it's accountability, that it's not justice, because there's nothing being restored. You can give money to the family and write laws in George Floyd's name and all the stuff that's happening, but it doesn't bring him back.
Yes.
And not just natural causes his life ended, is because he was murdered in broad daylight on video for the whole world to see. Yeah. So I would say it's accountability that Derek Chauvin was convicted on all 3 charges.
Yeah.
But that's just me and some other people.
That's good. I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah.
But yeah, all right, so that's a great segue. Let's pivot a little bit. We wanted to talk a little bit about the sports world, and not just on the field, on the court, but along these same lines. So how do you view the increase in prominent athletes speaking up about racial justice? So, I mean, I take this maybe even back to 2017 is probably the catalyst for the modern day, I'd say, movements with Colin Kaepernick taking the knee during the national anthem, playing for the 49ers back then. But I want to preface it by saying that, but I don't want to ignore, history. It's not like that was the first thing that was ever done. I don't know how much of more of a historian you are. I'm assuming more than myself, but Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, Kareem, kind of the goats of activism with sports. But let's start maybe with Kaepernick first. So how do you view that plus 2020 with just the increase in athletes using their platform to speak up about racial justice? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah. So, Cap, I think it was in 2016, took that knee, the height of a really wild election year for our country, as we all know. But as I wouldn't call myself a historian, but I like to learn and I want to know, people have come before Cap, right? And so I'd even shared this when I started seeing all the pushback Cap was getting, when he took a knee, and he kept taking a knee, and people had all their, thoughts and reactions to it. And so I had actually posted, when I was on Facebook. I'm not really on there much anymore because Facebook is a whole other world. But I started seeing some of the people I was friends with, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to say something. And so I talk about Kaepernick in a post on Facebook, and I said, it's interesting. One of the things I said was, athletes are not your entertainment slaves. I am not one to mince words. People often tell me, like, we know what we're going to get with you, Alethea, because I just think we need to call a spade. And so I named that. Like, you want athletes to just shut up and dribble, as LeBron and others were told, or just go out and throw football, score a bunch of touchdowns, win the gold medals, all the things. And so I said, athletes aren't your entertainment slaves. And so y'all are mad at Kaepernick, but what's funny is, it's the same people that were like, oh, I love Muhammad Ali, like float like a butterfly, sing like a bee. I'm like, y'all have no idea apparently what Ali said about the Vietnam War and that he was willing to go to jail because he was like, I will not go and fight people who look like me for some war that really doesn't mean anything. I'm like, it's funny that y'all are mad at Cap and are burning your Nike gear, which I'm like, first of all, you already bought it. So you look silly burning your gear, but okay. If that makes you feel better, but y'all are mad at Cap, but Jackie Robinson, man, y'all will wear your 42 jersey and you'll honor Jackie Robinson Day and you'll tout him like he broke the color barrier in baseball. Let me tell you what, I'm going to read this real quick because I think it's important. Let me tell you what Jackie Robinson said in his memoir. He talks about the national anthem. And so he says, as I write this 20 years later, I cannot stand and sing the anthem. I cannot salute the flag. I know that I'm a black man in a white world. in 1972, in 1947, at my birth in 1919. I know that I never had it made. And so when I said, I would not say I'm a historian, but that context is important. It's also important when I think about Tommy Smith and John Carlos in the '68 Olympics, right? They raised their Black Power fists and all the stuff they were wearing. There's the Center for Civil and Human Rights here in Atlanta had 2019 had this whole wall up talking about Tommy Smith and John Carlos, and had pinpointed everything they were wearing and the statement they were making and the heat that they took when they came back to the States from the '68 Olympics. And so all of that and then some, is connected to Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, right? And him recognizing the injustice that was taking place and a way he could respond, right? And having his name was Nate, I'm blanking his last name, military guy, kneel with him. So that's even the whole conversation, you're disrespecting the military. I'm like, but a military person knelt with him, told him, said you could kneel.
Right.
Okay. So anyways, so, I appreciated Cap's willingness to do that, to engage it, to recognize there's a way he can respond that will affect some change. And it's really sad that it took the uprisings of 2020 for the NFL and its convenience to now say, we're for Black people. 70% of our league is African American, so we're going to post our black square, and we're gonna do this, $250 million donation. Mind you, it was over 10 years, so I was like, let's do the math. The NFL brought in $9 billion in revenue in 2019 alone. So okay, you gave 25 million or whatever it was, whatever that math is, in each year. Good for you. I'm not going to be excited about that. You blackballed someone and now y'all want to act like you're all about racial justice. Don't do that. Don't do that. So it's unfortunate, but I think Cap willing to not cave into the pressure. He could have easily said, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. I did not expect this much intensity to come back from this. And so, I think Cap, started kind of the newer wave, so to speak, of some, athlete activism and athletes recognizing their autonomy as people, right? Not simply just I put on a jersey, I dribble a ball, I make millions of dollars. And people want to relegate them to that. You make millions of dollars. How can you complain about injustice? Right. Benjamin Watson, former NFL player, just recently retired, Black man, had a great career in the NFL. He wrote a book, and I don't know, I'm having so many brain farts tonight, but Ben Watson wrote a book, look it up. In his book, one of the first chapters, he talks about how his wife was pregnant and they were on the way to the hospital, and he drives a Range Rover because he makes millions of dollars. And they're on the way to the hospital. They get pulled over at 2 a.m. and the officer basically is like, I don't think this is your car. And he's like, what? So he talks about that experience. So I'm like, Benjamin Watson, all the Black men that play in the NFL, they don't get to separate when they leave the field and get in their millions of dollars worth of cars and drive to their multi-million-dollar mansions. They don't stop being Black. Yeah. And so it's so interesting to me where it's we want to separate, you're an athlete and then you're a person. It's no, they never stop being either. Right. And so, Cap, I think, unleashed something for other athletes as things started to continue to unfold. And obviously, what happened in 2020 just opened the door for so many of them. So I think about Natasha Cloud, plays for the Washington Mystics, Renee Montgomery, former WNBA player for the Atlanta Dream, now a co-owner of the Atlanta Dream. The Atlanta Dream, y'all, I don't know if you guys know this. Okay, so it's one of the things I love living in Atlanta. There's a lot of Black people here, so it's great. And I've never been in the majority ever in my life until I moved here, but it's wild. So the Atlanta Dream, while they're in the bubble, started campaigning for Raphael Warnock. He had no one really knew about him. He didn't have the money. The moment they started campaigning for Raphael Warnock, literally changed the Senate race. Yeah. And he was able to flip the seat and get Kelly Loeffler out of there because that woman is wildly racist. And so Renee Montgomery's been a part of that, right? So seeing her engage, a number of other NBA players, obviously LeBron, starting more than a vote. So helping, even recognizing activism isn't just you're going out and marching and some of that stuff. LeBron recognizes not just his brand, but how much money he has, an opportunity, but to leverage that and say, wow, there's so many injustices when it comes to voting rights. And if we're paying attention, so many states have passed bills now because Congress flipped, right?
Yeah.
It is Democratic majority now. Multiple seats flipped. I mean, here in Georgia, the whole country was watching us when those 2 seats flipped. And so being able to educate people. And so, again, I think you have others. Jeremy Lin, Jeremy Lin's been talking about stuff for a little while. People haven't picked up on it as much. And sadly, when there's trauma present and oppression present, it's when we want to elevate the voices, right? So it's like, oh, there's a rise in anti-Asian violence. Like, okay, now let's elevate the Asian voices. Jeremy Lin has spoken out about stuff prior to what we've seen in the last year. But Chloe Kim, she, phenomenal snowboarder. She has recently spoken up. Naomi Osaka, like wearing a mask for every match, over the summer. So I think CAP, like I said, opened the door for some of the newer activism for athletes to say, and then Maya Moore, Maya's a friend of mine. And for her to step away, from basketball for a couple of seasons. And again, an injustice with Jonathan Irons, and it led to his release last year, And so seeing these athletes step away, for Natasha Cloud to say, I'm not going to play in the WNBA season. And then what was really sweet about that was, I think it was Kyrie Irving said, I'm going to give, it was like $3 million to WNBA players because they're forfeiting their salary by not playing in the bubble. Yeah. And Natasha Cloud was doing something that was important to her and recognizing it is so much bigger than basketball. And so people might have their opinions about what does athlete activism look like, but I think it's important for athletes to own that they're human beings first, and they don't stop being whatever race and ethnicity they are when they step on the court or on the field or on the track. And so I think it's important, but we need to know the history that comes with that. That people. I don't want people to be like, oh man, Colin Kaepernick, and never ever mention Tommy Smith, never ever mention John Carlos, never mention Jim Brown, never mention Muhammad Ali. And he would, right? And so I hope this younger generation recognizes that. So anyway, so I'm all for it because I think it's important. Athletes have, we say they have a platform, they have access in different ways that other people don't, and they have opportunity to leverage that for the greater good in a lot of ways. And so those are some of my thoughts about it.
So many follow-up thoughts, but I think we mentioned being just educated, whether you think yourself a historian or not, but being educated about just certain things. I think I'm really big with just narratives, I guess. And one thing sticks out to me that you said, athletes are human first, and they don't, money, sure, it's great. I don't think they would ever complain about the money they make. At least not the men. I'll say that. But I mean, it's important to understand, I think, just that reality that they're human first. Money. LeBron isn't immune to racism. He gets certain perks for sure. Sure. He would be the first to tell you that. But a couple years ago, someone vandalized his house, wrote the N-word across his house. Yep. He's not where he grew up, like in the hood and stuff, but that just shows you he's not immune to experiencing that kind of racism. And I think the narrative of our country is to continue the more progress is, the more, I think I said this on a previous episode, but I have trouble letting go of the saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And that's, I think, indicative of that. I was like, sure, like LeBron's LeBron, he embodies a ton of progress, but then boom, there it is right there on his house. And then something that stuck out to me, I don't know if this kind of went under the radar. I don't follow much football for a lot of reasons, but something stuck out to me because, the NFL's kind of been the catalyst for this, I think, poor response by a big company that is the NFL to outspokenness by its athletes. You have, oh my gosh, the Chiefs quarterback, Mahomes.
Oh, Patrick Mahomes.
You have him signing, what did he sign, like $400 million contract or whatever. That's great for him. Anyway, he got that. And then, so it's all, and then that on top of, fresh off the Super Bowl, and then all these things, everything's going his way. And then I couldn't help but focus on, or I was struck by the first game of the season when the Texans Chiefs play, him and Deshaun Watson are, joining arms with their teams. I know Deshaun Watson's pretty controversial currently, but in that game, locking arms, and then the whole hometown Chiefs, Kansas City booing them for taking that stand. And I'm like, man, y'all, look at that. Y'all's star quarterback, the face of the NFL. Y'all think he's immune and just needs to be grateful.
Yep.
Right? Needs to just be grateful for the money he's making, shut up and play football for y'all, and y'all are booing him.
Yep.
Because he's taking a stand for his rights as a black man. Like $400 million doesn't protect him from that. Literally doesn't protect him for that. I'm like, so that's the kind of stuff I tend to fall on a pretty cynical side sometimes. But I'm like, it's so hard to celebrate certain things when it seems like you should, when you know what history tells us.
Yep.
And I mean, even in 2020, I'm sure you had plenty of these conversations. You know, people I think were celebrating, all these companies are making all these moves and changing logos, changing names. A big, for me, a big one that always comes up, the Redskins are changing the name finally. I'm like, I'm just like, get out of here. Like that's, I'm like, I've stopped people telling me, I'm like, that's nothing, right? That's like, that is literally, that's nothing. Like they've been told for decades, asked for decades.
So long.
Decades to change the name, the egregiously racist name, to just to swoop in and say, oh, well, this group of this one Native American person or this one tiny group says it's actually not racist, so we'll go with that one.
Yep.
But then, 2020 happens and, FedEx is pulling out, Nike's pulling out, all these companies are pulling out.
So convenient.
So, I think we'll take a stand now. We'll go ahead and change that name. And it's just, it's not wanting to celebrate anything. It's, we're not going to celebrate something that's not worth celebrating. That's
exactly.
all performative.
Exactly.
I try to pinpoint reactionary versus proactive things right now. And I think it carries a lot of weight, which side of the fence you fall on.
It does. And then when you pay attention, it's the money is tied to it, right? Yeah. So it's like the pressure, like, well, FedEx, if you don't pull out, Nike, if you don't pull out, then you recognize what's going to happen. But it makes you look really good if you're like, oh yeah, we're taking a stand. I'm like, this is so convenient, right? Like I was talking to other friends recently, and it's like, I'm not going to applaud people for doing like the bare minimum. Like when Christians are like, look, I'm anti-racist. It's like, okay, you should be. It shouldn't have taken all of this for you to say, to actively work towards being anti-racist. I'm not going to applaud you for doing the bare minimum. What are you doing beyond that? Right. And so people got, again, social media plays so heavily into this. People got swept up into, let me post the black square. And yet what transpired in the election that required days and days after before it was actually finalized, because that many people, it's like, I can post a black square and I'll take maybe a little bit of heat on my Instagram and in my DMs, and maybe I'll lose a couple of brands, but, oh, you want me to vote differently? But what about that one single issue? I can't let that go. So that black square didn't really mean anything then. Right. And so that's a whole nother conversation we need to have about performative activism, performative justice. Right. I think you're hitting on some of that. And the irony, even with Kansas City, someone else pointed out to me, because I have some indigenous friends and follow some indigenous people on social media. And they're like, it's really ironic that there's Black Lives Matter paraphernalia, like on the field and all around. And they're doing this, like locking arms. And one, they're being booed. So clearly that highlights it's not just about you're mad about the military. So there's that. You're debunking your own reasoning for being mad about the national anthem stuff. But then you're called the Kansas City Chiefs, and people, indigenous people, are asking you to remove your name. And you've got Black Lives Matter hashtagged all around your stadium. That is very ironic.
Wow.
Again, because there's history there. And it's like, well, the Washington football team? Oh my gosh, what am I going to do with my gear? It doesn't say what it said anymore. Like, oh my gosh, it's just a name. It's just a name, And so again, the conversation is so layered, and how can we go beyond the surface level of you changed the name, you hashtag Black Lives Matter, you walked at a protest, you donated some money. Someone on Twitter recently said, ask white people, what are you doing to like come alongside and like support Black people and other people of color? I didn't read the thread, but someone else I follow, Black man, responded to it. And he goes, wow, it's really sad reading this, because what most people are saying is they're giving to charity.
Okay.
Interesting. Like that's what the response is, to care for the Black people and other people of color. Wow, it's got to go much further than that. There's so much more to it. So anyways, I'll say, like I said, I'm not going to applaud people for doing the bare minimum for the convenience of an action, because you want people to still buy your brand. So
on that, let's camp out there for a second with the NBA. So I view it as, we're talking about performative, reactionary, being proactive. I think WNBA, NBA, for sure, WNBA does not get enough credit for spearheading this.
Yeah.
As far as the big platform of what people are actually following, is the NBA, because they had, did so much stuff with the playoffs and bubble, and that was front and center. So, I think not that they've done everything perfectly by any means, but do you view the NBA as kind of modeling how to do this well? And this came up on my last episode. My friend that used to play in the NBA, he viewed it as kind of what you're saying. I'm not going to celebrate that much because it's the players doing it.
Yeah,
I'm not going to celebrate the 28, 29. I guess it's probably, I don't even know if it's all of them, 29 or so white men. He had trouble believing that they wanted all this to happen, but they are essentially just having to allow the players to do it or they're not going to play type thing, which I don't know. I mean, that absolutely has merit, but I viewed it more as, regardless how they got there, they let the players do what they're doing. I think Adam Silver's done a great job, the commissioner, compared to a Major League Baseball, an NFL. Sure. I grew up playing ice hockey, but the NHL, my gosh.
Oh, man.
So that could be another episode. Do you view it as positively? Not that they've done everything perfectly, but I thought that they have done, I think, maybe as well as a big corporation like that could do. What do you think?
Like you said, I first would just acknowledge the WNBA has led the way, Yes. We can go back to when Maya and her teammates, wore shirts and spoke out against what happened, when Philando Castile was murdered by the police officer in the Twin Cities, right? And so the WNBA has been the forefront in so many ways. And I think the NBA, because they're, a lot of them are friends, got to really pay attention to and see what the women did when they were like, we're not going to play.
Yeah.
We're not going to play. And they didn't. And they don't nearly bring in as much money as the NBA players do, right? So it is actually more costly for them to say, we're not going to play a playoff game. We know the TV is here. They're ready to air the games. Yeah. It's going to cost us something. So I think the WNBA, they were getting more recognition, but they've totally have paved the way, in my opinion, with the new wave of what we're experiencing. The NBA, the players want to do what their players want to do, right? And I think a lot of the coaches and owners and GMs, right? It's like, okay, we'll let this maybe go. We'll let this kind of go, right? Because we want to be in support of our players. So we'll, you can kneel during the national anthem, and we'll acknowledge all the different Black people who maybe have been killed or who we want to support. But the moment the Milwaukee Bucks said we're not going to play, that was a moment when they did not come out of the locker room because Jacob Blake got shot in the back 7 times and now is paralyzed from the waist down. The officer who shot him just got to go back to work 3 weeks ago. When the Milwaukee Bucks said, we're not going to play, nope, no more of this. We're just going to kneel during the national anthem, or we're going to wear our black shirts, or these little things. Go beyond the surface to get deeper. So when they said they're not going to play, I think watching that unfold, it shook people. They're actually not going to play. They're not going to come out and play. Oh, the other game isn't being played either. Oh, the players are meeting because they actually don't know if they're going to continue playing. Yeah. There's so much money at stake.
Yeah.
Now, there's speculation about what happened behind closed doors, about how conversations went. You had players that were like, no, we're done. Let's end the season. Let's actually make a statement. And you had other players say, no, let's play. We can still play and speak to these things, right? And so people are going to have their opinions. I would have totally been for them not playing another game.
Okay.
Because that really shakes people. For them to say, nope, we're not going to entertain you. We're not going to, you've seen enough. We're going to kneel, because now it's become a thing. Oh my gosh, the whole narrative changes. Oh, so that person didn't kneel during the national anthem. Yeah. Can you believe that? It's not about that. Mm-hmm. It's not about that. But it became a thing because it was oh, we just expect this now.
Yeah.
So if you're really going to speak to the injustice that's at play, how do you go beyond the narrative now shifting? And it's okay, this is just a thing you do, versus no, we're actually not going to play. We're actually not going to provide the entertainment that people want. And on one hand, it was, we're in a pandemic. Sports hasn't been played. People are at home. A lot of people are really isolated. Sports does elicit some excitement and some good. When you watch a good basketball game, I'm a basketball person. So when you watch the game of basketball we played and it's competitive and it's fun and it's exciting, it does help you. Like, I don't have to think about that, or maybe you do, right? Because the players are engaging in different ways. But there's, for some of us, people, it's like, wow, this is really good. We can enjoy this. But it's not the athlete's responsibility to entertain me and provide an outlet for me either. Yeah. Especially because they took all the backlash. Exactly. Right. And so because the way Black athletes are exploited, in particular. And so anyways, I think the NBA has done a good job, I will say. But I really do wrestle even with the All-Star game. Several of the players, this All-Star game that just happened in March, it was here in Atlanta. Several of the players publicly said, we do not want to play. And I find it interesting that Adam Silver still made them play, still made them travel during the pandemic in the midst of multiple games getting canceled because multiple players either were exposed to COVID, there's contact tracing, games were getting canceled left and right, still making them come to Atlanta. In a modified one day, they did everything one thing before and then everything big stuff the day of, right? And several players saying that they didn't want to play. And then it's like, oh, we're going to support the HBCUs. So we're going to have Clark Atlanta Symphony sing before, and we're going to have the bands play for the intros, and we're going to put it on the floor, and we're going to have the gear. Now, the gear is great because Support Black Colleges is Black owned. Like, they're all about the HBCUs. Yeah. So I get it, but I was really struggling. Like, gosh, this feels so performative to me. Okay. You can support the HBCUs without playing the All-Star game. Yeah. You don't have to do important. That. Yeah, that makes sense. You could play the All-Star game in Atlanta next year. But it's convenient to do it now. Why didn't you guys do it 2 years ago? That's the part that's hard for me, even with the NBA right now, of you can do these without actually playing the game. You could actually listen to your players and saying, why are we playing this? Like, why are we doing this? We don't want to, in the midst of all we're already battling because we have a season. We're having to play. We're having to travel all over the country. We're not in a bubble anymore. So that's where, for me personally, I struggle a little bit with, I've battled the cynicism a little bit too, as you were sharing. And so I don't want to be uber cynical about everything, but I'm also not going to fall into the trap of like, oh my gosh, look what they're doing. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like, it's really good for the HBCUs. And I know that, like, especially being here in Atlanta with 3 HBCUs, technically now 4. Morris Brown just got their accreditation back after 20 years. Oh, wow. So but right before that wasn't at the All-Star time. So you have Clark Atlanta, Spelman, and Morehouse, right? So 3 literally historic Black colleges here in Atlanta. So I'm all for that. But I think there's other ways you can support them and advocate and champion them without forcing the players to play the game. So those are my thoughts about it.
You may have answered this in a roundabout way, but I mean, what's something tangible, kind of off the top of your head, that needs to change in sports overall, and maybe even at the more relatable level, non-professional? I know you know a lot of athletes, especially college athletes. I'm thinking everything from paying athletes to, you mentioned HBCUs, how, underfunded they are, to say the least. Yeah. I don't know, what's 1 or 2 things that you can tangibly say, this needs to happen yesterday?
Yeah. Ooh, so many thoughts. I would say the pay part is important. We've seen the battle of equal pay, right? So like you've got, we had to do it on a professional level, but I think what happens at the professional level has implications for the collegiate level. And we saw this play out in March Madness. We saw this between the men's tournament and the women's tournament. The NCAA got blasted because they're like, by a player, which then, caught steam. Like, it was like, why is this the weight room for the women's tournament? And this is what the men have. Why is this the food the women have? The swag bags, all the things, right? Yeah. And it's not about those things per se, but it exposes the inequities that are present. And so if we professionally can see, we need to market better, get behind, because they want, like, it's like when Draymond Green went on his little rant on Twitter and was like tagging women athletes, like, y'all basically need to work harder. And it's like, bro, the system is set up against us. What do you mean? Like, we're trying. You have an opportunity as a male athlete with a lot of brands and all that you're connected to actually do something to help us, not call us out on Twitter, tell us we're not working hard enough. And so there's a system in place that allows for there to be inequity. So if things change at the top with the equal pay conversation and the marketing, that has a ripple effect down the chain for collegiate athletes. And what was being publicized from the women's tournament, you've got ESPN, like their PR page, they're putting out all the ratings, right? So first time the women's tournament has been at a neutral site from the beginning. It usually is not at a neutral site until the Sweet 16. So they've been asking for it for years, and it finally was forced to happen because of the pandemic. And so you see the ratings, they did this one stat where it was like looking at some of the different college athletes, and I don't understand all this, but like basically like their social media engagement and like how that translates to money. Several of the women's players were in the top 10. And I was like, well, this is interesting because people act like women's sports aren't marketable. So if the women's tournament, and I'm talking about Division I in particular, because there's also issues at Division II and Division III level with this, but we'll just talk about the Division I tournament. The women's tournament is marketed differently. You market the men's tournament, great. So that's why you can sign a $9 billion TV contract with Turner Sports, right? But you don't push to market the women's tournament. We just hear, the women's tournament loses money every year. Well, I wonder why that is. You could allocate money. There's only two. It's the men's tournament and two other, I think men's ice hockey and one other one that actually generate revenue from any of the tournaments, any of their sports. The rest of them lose money based on what the NCAA put out when they got blasted. So if you change the way that the women's game is marketed and you host at a neutral site and you put your money behind it, people will watch it. The way I saw people respond, like, oh my gosh, the women's tournament is so fun. It's like, we've been telling y'all.
Can you explain why that's important? What do you mean, for maybe people that don't follow the tournaments? Why is it important to have a neutral site? So
there's for the women's tournament, the first and second rounds, the higher seed is a host. And so there's just so much that you are able to leverage as a top seed. You already have that because you're a higher seed, and now you're playing at home, and you actually have to have more of your fans present, and nothing changes. Like having played in college, when we got to play at home, it was like, oh, it's a tournament, but cool. We were hosting the first round because we were the higher seed, and it's like, oh, bet this is great. But then we go to a neutral site. It's like, wait a minute, I don't know this arena like that. The rims might feel a little different. There's nuances in the game that people, unless you play, recognize. But it's like the feel of the gym. You're getting acclimated to so many different things. So in
starting at the neutral site.
Yes, it's a game. It literally is a game changer for some people, for some players, because it puts you in a different mindset versus I'm playing at home. So yeah, it's a tournament, but I'm playing at home. I didn't have to travel. I didn't have to sleep in a hotel. I didn't have to do any of those things that are factored into to playing in the tournament. So there's an excitement even when you're at a neutral site. It's like, all right, here we go. Ohio State women, they're playing at home. Cool.
So to give some context, you guys, the women finally got that neutral site.
Yes.
And then they get that crappy weight room.
And it was janky.
Yeah.
Janky.
So then
talking about they didn't have enough space.
Right.
I've been in San Antonio before. I've been to the Final Four there. Y'all got space. And if you don't make it.
And she showed it on the video. They said not enough space, and then there's a giant ballroom. What do you mean there's no space?
They have space. They have space. And if you get creative as someone who I've never planned that large of an event, I will say that, right? I can acknowledge that. But you're at that level for a reason. You're on the NCAA planning committee for a reason. Yeah. You have to think strategically and creatively in those situations. So you're like, okay, we're in a pandemic. We had never experienced this before. Okay, here's our location. We're in San Antonio. How do we create a space where we're still taking care of our athletes, but we can bring in, you pay more money to bring stuff in. If that was the case for the men's tournament, if they got to Indy and said, oh my gosh, we don't have enough space, they would have moved hell and high water to provide space for the men. So the men wouldn't have even noticed. The men's players and coaches and staff wouldn't have even noticed that they added on something or they brought other stuff in. But for the women's tournament, that was one of the first things they said, there's not enough space. Yeah. That's interesting to me. No, you could get creative behind that. And it was unfortunate for the woman who was leading the committee for the women's tournament. So I'm like, now you're putting a woman on the chopping block. She's probably working with what she got. Right. And Mark Emmert is not a good leader. And so now she's set up to get slammed for this that I don't even think I'm assuming is not even her fault. But if you don't have it, you figure it out. You make it happen. That's what good leaders do. So it was very exposing for the NCAA. And so I think, again, if it's the equal pay stuff, if that changes and the marketing changes, it changes the way people engage college athletics for the women. And the things that we've been saying for years, people are now going to are starting to see. People want to watch women's basketball. Now, the inequities now flow when you get into Division II and Division III, right? You've got Division I programs that have a lot of money. And so they're able to take some of the hits even financially, right? Division II level, I played Division II. That's not the case. That's not the case at all. And so them not playing and competing, I can't imagine the way that has affected the conference I used to play in when I was played at Ashland University. I think about Division III, they definitely don't have the amenities and the funds, right? HBCUs, right? Like they are already underfunded and they didn't get to compete. And so again, now we're seeing even some change there as some of the more prominent athletes, men's players right now for HBCUs or coaches. Deion Sanders at Jackson State and Eddie George just got hired at Tennessee State. Oh, okay. That's going to change some things for the HBCUs. It's going to be a draw and more what we've seen like historically, like years ago when you had prominent top tier football players, men's basketball players going to HBCUs. And then it was like, wait, the money's at the PWIs, predominantly white institutions. I'm going to go there. I won't have to struggle at this HBCU. Now that's shifting again. So when those start to change, you're going to start to see some differences in the way that athletes are represented and what we see televised on ESPN, not ESPN2 or ESPNU or tucked away on some ESPN channel that no one even has access to because it's not a part of your regular cable programming. So,
so many other questions, man. You're an encyclopedia. I knew you would be. That was fantastic. Let's stick with the women's sports even a little bit more. I had to do even some research over this last year because I wanted to understand it. I was extremely ignorant to it. It's hard not to view unequal or the inequities and the pay gaps between, I'm a basketball fan as well, like, a WNBA versus NBA. It's hard. I think it's easy to just look at that as the reality and think, well, that stinks, but there's more fans for the NBA. So that's just what's going to happen. It's no one's fault. So like this again, you might have kind of answered this already, or we might tell me if we don't have time for you to answer this, but what do you think, like, why is that? And like, is it a matter of advertising? Because then I had to look up, okay, like what is going on with the finances? And it was more that it wasn't just the unequal, like millions versus hundreds of thousands. I mean, that is a reality, but it was more that the women on top of getting paid less because of less, fans, advertising, exposure. It was helpful for me to see that they get a smaller percentage of the revenue that the league gets than the NBA players get percentage wise, which that for sure, then I just got it. I was like, what's happening? Why is that a thing?
Yep. Oh, that's such a big question. And I feel like I have a lot to learn. I've been following WNBA since its inception, as a young girl growing up wanting to play professionally. There was a league that the Columbus Quest played in when I was really young. And then this is the 25th year anniversary of the WNBA. And so that means I was 9 when the WNBA started. And so it has come a long way. Like we can look back over the 25 years and say that, right? For a number of reasons, but there is so much that goes into that. It was interesting seeing some of the players finally publicize some of that, of how the pay breakdown. And it's not just about, we don't get enough fans, but like you're saying, the percentage that they get, the way that they travel, the men are flying on private jets. The women are flying like economy, like they're, and so when stuff was happening with, when was it? Some stuff was happening. I can't remember when it was last year before maybe. And like the players are posting like, oh, our flight got canceled. So we're stuck in the airport and then they have to turn around and literally get off a plane and go play a game. They're professional athletes. So women's professional league here. And so there's, I think, a number of factors. And I come back to, when I think about redistribution. And so Dr. John Perkins, he wrote this book called With Justice for All. And it actually it's a phenomenal book. I mean, Dr. Perkins is one of the giants, I would say, in the civil rights movement and justice work that does not get enough credit. Like was around the same time as Dr. King. And so he wrote this book, and in the book, he talks about 3 R's: relocation, reconciliation, redistribution. And in this section on redistribution, that's literally he's talking about what does it look like to redistribute funds? What does it look to build co-ops and to do things together in the community, and that we're addressing poverty, we're addressing some of those inequities that are just existing. There's there's inequity before the inception of WNBA. There's been inequities in the way that women are paid and the way that women are advertised and marketed, right? And so there's like I said earlier, a system already in place. And so how do you address some of the depth of that? Not simply by saying, oh, the women don't get enough fans. Well, one, it does come down to marketing. If you market something well and you expose people, they're going to respond because they're going to see the product, so to speak, is good. Yeah. But when you don't televise it, when you put a men's lacrosse championship on ESPN and you got a WNBA game on ESPN2 at the same time, people are actually watching what's on ESPN over ESPN2. It's right? A great example. Or you're playing them at random times. Like you're not playing them at prime time, right? There was even people were mad that the women's national championship game for Division I wasn't played at prime time. And people were like, all right, we got the coverage and now you're not going to play it at prime time. Really? Yeah. So we know when things are marketed well, you're like, wow, man, that's legit. Like I want to watch that, or I want to buy that, or I want to whatever, support that. And so marketing equals dollars, right? Yeah. Advertising equals, like there's so much money attached to that. And also the NBA is connected to the WNBA in a lot of ways. And so then my question then becomes, let's reimagine, let's think differently. There's so much money that comes into the NBA. What does it look like to reallocate more of your funds into the WNBA so that a higher percentage then goes to the players so that they actually get paid what they should get paid? Yeah. Not that they are choosing not to play here in the US because their clubs overseas are saying, we're going to pay you to not play. So you are fresh when you come over. Mm-hmm. Diana Taurasi did that a few years ago and people are like, wait, Diana Taurasi is not going to play? I was like, well, why would she? Her club in Russia is paying her to not play so that when she goes over there in October, she is as fresh as can be because she makes way more money with her club in Russia. Then guess who did next? Candace Parker did it next. Then more players said, okay, yeah, the clubs are like, oh, this is all it takes for y'all to not be worn out and a whole season and come over here and have to compete again. And so players won't have to do that if we start to change some things here. And there's opportunity to do it. People just don't want to because for whatever reasons that are present. And so again, I think like even Jordan, like they brought on a number of WNBA, the Jordan brand has brought on a number of WNBA players to market. Like I follow some of them or I see it on Instagram. Right. And it's like, oh, you're a Jordan athlete now. Dope. Okay. Wow. You're a Jordan athlete. Now it came with Maya being the first. She was the first female to sign with the Jordan brand when she came out of college. And so again, open the door. Right. And so for the Jordan brand, again, they're not perfect. And there's a lot of, I think, issues at times, but like, again, let's think differently. Let's reallocate, let's redistribute funds that are there because we can, it's there, but it forces us to think differently. Right. And I'm not saying, oh, let's take away from the men, but it is problematic to me when I think about Diana Taurasi. Diana Taurasi could be making less than the 15th man on the roster for an NBA team. Yes. That is crazy. Yeah, when
all of them were posting, when there was a salary spike, the NBA posting all those deals, I was like, he's making $30 million as a bench warmer. Yep.
And the women's cap like just changed. Yeah. Like they get locked into 4-year contracts. And so they're making $60K. I think like that's how low some of the rookie contracts can be through 4 years. Gosh. So you go overseas because you make way more money, especially if you're really good. So again, I feel like there's still so much I'm learning, but I've paid attention. I've talked to some different people. I read some of the stuff and I start to see like, wow, there's opportunity there. And they're making a choice by not doing it for whatever reason, but you can. What if you tried it? What if we look at the things that are in place and say the women are only able to do so much because of literally things are working against them. Literally. Yeah. When you've got men on social media sliding in the comments and saying, hey, you just belong in the kitchen in 2021. These are the types of mentalities and things that are constantly working against women who are out here, who are freaking ballers, who actually are better than some NBA players. No. Okay. So it's not about, you don't, just because they don't do all the flashy stuff. If you actually appreciate the game of basketball, then you appreciate watching the women's game because it is so competitive. Yeah. Each year, I feel like it's gotten better and better and better watching the WNBA. Absolutely. The players coming out of college are getting, I'm like, better and better and better. Like it's crazy to the talent level. Yeah. If you really appreciate the game, if you only watch a game of basketball because you like people dunking, like, sure. Okay. Y'all don't say nothing about the fact that the men travel so much. Yeah. Like there's clips I watch and I'm like, and on Twitter, they're like, oh my gosh, that was so dope. And I'll watch it and I'll be like, No, he traveled and y'all don't even care. That's taking away from the game. I don't care how dope the dunk was. He took 4 steps to get there. That's a travel in the game of basketball, but we don't care about the purity of it. And so again, if you market differently, if you change some things, it changes the landscape of how people engage basketball, engage the women's game. But it requires a significant change. It requires us to think differently. It requires us to reimagine what it could look like, and not just say, well, this is just how it's always been. So let's just throw a few dimes here and a few dimes there and, sign a couple athletes and then we're good. Like it takes so much more than that because there's so much history that's at play that we are. And that's a just a microcosm of our country, you know, and the things that we've been talking about,
Yeah.
So.
I backed it up wholeheartedly with watching more women's games. I will not at all pretend to be someone that has watched many women's games. I'm absolutely extremely ignorant of the women's game. Within the last couple years, I've tried to watch more games, and that absolutely sticks out. I'm like, there's something about it, the purity of it. I think people watch like even like a Steph. Or people that are more, no one can really relate to being LeBron because no one's that of his stature. So like everyone wants to watch Steph because he's more normal stature, and they can always try to shoot his range. No one can try to be LeBron.
Exactly.
So, but I'm like, man, if you want to watch relatable players, watch these women, and the fundamentals is what stuck out to me. I'm not gonna lie, I watched a little bit more in lieu of Kobe Bryant's passing because he was such a big advocate for WNBA, and just watching, I mean, the fundamentals, like you said, just the purity of the shooting, the dribbling, the footwork is just head and shoulders above the men's game, like for sure.
And it's fun. It's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. I've been to so many WNBA games where I'm like on the edge of my seat. Like I'm like, I've been to playoff games. Like they're so fun to watch. But you got to change the narrative around the game. Yeah. Like that's what we're talking about, right? Changing the narrative. Got to change the narrative around it. And so when people finally saw the women's tournament and I saw on Twitter and it was like, yeah, when y'all finally listen to what we've been saying and you're watching, it's really good. Yeah. It's really good.
So to our listeners.
Glad you're watching some more.
Yeah. To our listeners, it might sound like we might have detoured away from some of the racial elements to this, but I think you'll agree, Alethea. I feel like the backdrop with sports in our country and just historically, there's tons of racial implications behind everything we're talking about.
Yep.
Money and just the whole shut up and dribble mentality. Like that's not new, Was it Lindsey Graham? Is that who said it? Yeah. That wasn't the first person to put that out there. That's been the mentality all the way. I mean, historically, entertain us, do what we say. And sure, I'm not going to say progress has been made, but $1 million doesn't change that mentality. People still, the $1 million athletes still feel the weight of being that worker. So tons of racial implications behind, I think, all the elements that, you're discussing here. For sure. Yeah.
It's race intersects everything. That's something I've learned. I feel like it was in my like late 20s, honestly, when I finally had some language for my own experience and then started to see race intersects everything. You cannot separate race from different things. Right. And so like I watched the Jesse Owens movie. If you guys have never seen it, I highly recommend it. It's called Race. And, the narrative we hear, Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals. It was awesome. But the movie exposed so much about what he experienced as a Black man who ran for the U.S. in Nazi Germany. Think about that. We don't talk about that. It's just like, oh, he competed and he won 4 gold medals. You know why he won a 4th gold medal? I didn't realize this until I watched the movie. 2 Americans were ethnically Jewish. The Germans did not want them to compete in the whatever the race was, 4x1 or 4x4. Wow. So Jesse Owens was the alternate, and that's why he won 4 gold medals. And the U.S. gave in to Germany's demands. So it was interesting how the U.S. was like, oh, Germany's so awful because of the Holocaust, Nazi Germany. And yet we're doing the very same thing in different ways to their own people, right? And so again, it's race. Anytime we talk about the inequities that are present socioeconomically, class, gender, race intersects all of that, whether we want it to or not, because it's in the very fabric of our country.
Yes.
So if it's in the very founding of our nation, it's going to play out in everything. It's going to play out in education. It's going to play out in sports. It's going to play out in the workplace, and it's going to play out everywhere. We have to address and acknowledge it because it's not devoid of that intersection.
Yes. So allies, don't tell your friends of color why you got to make it about race. Yeah?
It's always been about race.
All right, let's try and end on a little bit of positivity moving forward. This has been great. So what's one thing, maybe within the last year, doesn't have to be, that has changed that you're like, all right, that's it. Let's keep going with that.
Ooh.
That maybe you don't look at so much apprehensively, but you're like, all right, we got something.
Yeah, that's hard in these dark days, to be honest. When you even said that question, I was like, what am I going to share?
It's all right.
Because I do feel more cynical than my cynicism has leveled up over the last 4 years. So, I'm usually a positive person, you know. I would say I want to be mindful of how I use my words here. You know, I think the way I see what gives me some encouragement, I'll say, I'm reminded, like, when we're talking about issues of race and justice, like, can be really easy for me to be like, white people, just all of y'all. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm just done. The Lord is really quick to remind me it's not all white people. And so I would say something that's been helpful for me is I see the white people I get to engage with who are really, really are leaning in, having conversations, actually changing some things, actually going beyond the surface level response or the surface level, like, oh, I gave to this person or this organization. Like, I feel good about myself. They feel far and few between. But for me, that's the white people don't give me hope. Like, my hope has to remain rooted in Jesus, and the Holy Spirit is the one who empowers people and helps people to see and to live differently. And so I have to remind myself of that. But I do, when I'm able to, like, I think about where are some of the safe spaces I have, and it's with some of my white friends. I mean, I have it with my friends of color and Black friends, but I do recognize, like, man, there are white people that I can talk to who they don't get it right all the time either. And they're humble enough to acknowledge that. Like, I had a really hard interaction with one of my best friends last year, and she had to own it. And it was a really painful experience, but wow, what it has done in our friendship. Now, I have wished it wouldn't have taken that, right? I wouldn't want to go through that again with her. Right. But what I've seen from her and the way she still showed up, the way that she really genuinely has my back, like, she's really ride or die for me. And so I would say that's something positive, you know, to answer your question.
That's great.
That's been, I would say that. And then I also say, and I've seen a lot more of it recently, but Black people, like, we're so much more than our pain and trauma. And, you know, social media, like I mentioned earlier, it's like, oh, let's highlight all the Black voices because of the pain and trauma, right? Like, you see the wave of followers on social media. Like, I've seen it with a lot of my friends who are Asian, like thousands and thousands, especially those who are more known. And it's like, wow, you're here because you want to diversify your feed, or, you know, because people are actually being killed. So watching Black people, especially recently, just say, like, Black joy, like, we got to highlight Black joy. It's okay. It's good for us to not simply see ourselves lying in the streets or necks getting pressed on for 9 minutes or getting lynched in broad daylight. We have to see so much. We have to see ourselves as more than that. And so that's been incredible. The conversations I've been a part of, the things I've seen on social media, just beautiful, honestly, like, and we need it. And so I'm just seeing more of that. So I think that in the midst, we know it's going to continue to happen. Like, the country has made that really clear an hour after the Derek Chauvin verdict. You know, we're back at it. It's happening right now, you know, in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, you know, so it's going to be constant. So how do we still claim and hold on to our dignity as Black people? And so we have to be reminded that there is joy in the midst of the trauma and the pain. And it's okay for us to embrace that. And so, that's been significant, especially just like I said, just in the last 2 weeks, the Black joy that we're trying to lean into and hold on to, it has to stay. in order for us to continue to survive, and I think historically we see that with those who were enslaved. Negro spirituals formed out of that, and to this day we still sing those. I'll be humming some of those sometimes, or when I'm like, Jesus be a fence, or keep me near the cross, but that came out of it was birthed out of the trauma and the pain of the Black church. But there was so much joy present as well in the midst of that. And so I'm like, if they could do that, we can do that too. And we have to fight for that and hold on to that. And so to me, it's sadly birthed out, the positive is birthed out of a negative, right. But it's so beautiful to witness. So that's got to stay. That positive thing has got to stay. So
I agree wholeheartedly. It is unfortunate at the cost, for sure. So much has happened, and I'm hesitant to say silver lining, but for lack of a better term, I think that's where I would land too. The positivity, as much as some ugly stuff is uprooted and continues to be, or coming more to the surface in the public eye, the white allies, especially that I've encountered and had conversations with, have been, irreplaceable, have been great. And obviously have that with other people of color, friends of color that I know, but there's something different about the white allies. There just is, which we could, talk about another time, but yeah, absolutely. Some of those relationships that I think you mentioned are for sure the positivity to hang on to. You just recommended the movie. You just recommended Jesse Owens' movie. I
think it's called Race.
Easy to remember. I'll put that in the show notes for sure. Do you have any other recommendations? I know you do, but any other recommendations, movies, books for somebody to check out?
Look at my bookshelf right now. There's a lot over there.
Give us one then if it's overwhelming.
I knew you were going to say one.
Well, you seemed overwhelmed, so.
No, I'm not overwhelmed. Narrowing it down is difficult, but the one I'm looking at right now that I'm so mad I didn't read earlier in life, the autobiography of Malcolm X. The narrative around Malcolm X is really problematic, but the U.S. really wants to control the narrative. Anyways, I won't get into all that 'cause we're at the end of here, but I would highly recommend the autobiography of Malcolm X to read it. I'm reading it right now. Wow. Oh my gosh. I'm so mad. It took me until I turned 34 to read this book. So that is up there. Jemar Tisby just recently put out a book, How to Fight Racism. I'm a big Jemar Tisby fan.
I recommend Color of Compromise all the time.
Yeah, I got Reading While Black by Esau McCaulley on my desk right here. He's really smart, so it's taken me a little while to get through it. Especially if you're Black, I would say you need to read this. I appreciate what Esau is doing in the book, but I would say also if you're not Black to read it, to get a perspective on the African American Christian tradition. I would also recommend The Cross and the Lynching Tree. Some people might not like that because of the narrative around James Cone and liberation theology. But again, I wish I would have read that before May of 2020. Highly recommend that. So those are a few. I got the Bread for the Resistance, 40 Devotions for Justice People by Donna Barber. So, gotta get some women up in there too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got a whole list I could rattle off, so I'll stop there. Those are just books. There's great. a number of films, like I said, that Google is our friend. So
yes.
Really, my encouragement is don't just do the whole, like I said, diversify your feed. Really Google who are Latina authors. Renee Padilla just was passed away, and I hate acknowledging this, I've never heard about him. And I was reading about him last night, and I'm like, why have I never heard about this man? Yeah. I'm so mad. I have so much to learn. And so get out of the Black-white dynamic, right? I know I listed Black people and references to books to read, but I want to name that too, of Latino, Latina, Asian men and women to listen to follow, to really pay attention to learn, not just to check your box. And again, that's just the start. There's so much for us to do. So
that's awesome. That's a great list.
Yeah.
That's a great list. All right. I'm going to end this one. This is a new segment I introduced last podcast with my friend who plays ball overseas, but this is your wheelhouse too. Let's end with some rapid fire. This isn't even just NBA. It's basketball heavy, but
okay.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Apologize to all the non-sports fans. I'm resisting temptation to turn this into an NBA side podcast, but here we go. Rapid fire, here we go. LeBron or MJ?
Oh, I knew that was coming. I knew it. Both.
Oh, okay. I'll give you one. Kobe or Tim Duncan?
Oh, Kobe.
Okay, yeah. Okay, we can keep going then. Lisa Leslie or Diana Taurasi?
Lisa Leslie.
All right. Who takes the NBA chip this year?
Oh.
Assuming everyone's healthy.
Oh, man. Well,
that might make it harder.
I'm a LeBron fan, so that makes me root for the Lakers. I want to make that distinction very clear. Okay. I know you're a Lakers fan, so, I don't know if we'll still be friends after this, but I just want to make that clear. If everyone's healthy, wow, the Lakers are definitely giving a run, but the Suns, like...
Are they for real, though?
They're... The Undefeated just was putting out something about them on Instagram. Like people are out here sleeping on them. I don't know. I haven't watched them play. I'll admit that. But I wonder. And the Nets, people think the Nets because they built that little powerhouse over there. I know LaMarcus Aldridge just retired, but they got a squad. The best record. I think it's the best record in the league. Mm-hmm. Understandable.
Understandable.
But I'm not really a fan. So. Yeah, that's a hard one.
I'm hearing Lakers from you is what I'm hearing.
I mean, Lakers they could, if everyone's healthy, they could repeat. But I think it's the Jazz. They got a squad too, but Donovan Mitchell just went out, so I think they would have fought. So yeah, I don't know. I'll just throw out Lakers, and maybe the Suns might really keep surprising all of us.
They might.
I mean, Devin Booker is a problem.
I want him.
A problem.
Mm-hmm. MJ or this is overall athletes. MJ or Serena Williams for people listening.
Serena.
Woo! I knew you were gonna say it. I knew you would. I'm not even.
Listen. I grew up in the Jordan era. That's why it's hard for me even to pick like between him and LeBron because I think there's I'm not getting into all that, but. Serena Williams, what that woman has accomplished.
So to be clear, you're saying she's the GOAT athlete for you? For
me.
Okay.
People gonna, it's fine. Y'all can slide my DMs and argue with me if you want to about this when y'all listen. That's fine. I'm willing to have this debate.
Yeah.
But for me, if I have to choose, when I look at it all together, greatest of all time. I just think about what Serena has accomplished and the ways in which she's accomplished it. And like nuts. She said, when someone asked her, I think earlier this year or last year, they said, do you think something about her being included in the GOAT conversation? And she said, if I was a man, I would have been in the conversation already. I said, well, there it is.
Yep. Wow.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna do that to me.
I was going to say my next one was going to be Serena or Simone Biles, but you kind of just answered that.
Yeah. Simone is phenomenal, though.
Yeah. Steph or KD?
Steph.
All right, last one. Best sports movie of all time.
Oh, my God.
I see that going around a lot, so I had to ask it.
Yo, I wasn't ready. Oh, man. Best sports movie of all time.
Want to do top 3?
Ooh, Lord. Okay. Now I got it. Man, I wasn't ready for this one. Oh, my gosh. You really put me on the spot here. My mind is going blank. Oh, my goodness. I mean, yeah. I'll throw the Sandlot out there because it's a classic. Yeah, just sports in general, because Love and Basketball is my favorite movie. So It's not technically a sports movie, but it is.
I see that. That's typically included.
The deemed in your category, I've seen that going around too about, best sports movie. Man. Yeah, I don't have one for you because my mind is blank right now. Oh my gosh. Forgive me, y'all. I promise I love sports. I just don't.
There's too
There's
many.
ones that are coming to my mind. I'm like,
I thought you would either have a super strong opinion about one right off the bat, or you would have this reaction. So,
yep. I don't have a strong.
all right.
Yeah, I don't have a strong reaction to it. I think there's a lot of good ones out there. You know, people throw out Hoosiers. That's a classic.
Yeah. Man, I thought that was a little overrated. In my opinion.
You know,
Okay,
I don't
yeah.
think it's for everybody.
Okay, yeah.
It's not in my top 3. I would say.
I've seen it. I was like, that was fine.
Yeah, people throw out Glory Road. You know, again, people say it can be like a white savior type of movie, but if you really pay attention to the story of what Texas Southern, I believe at the time, starting 5, only playing the black players and starting 5, had never happened against Adolph Rupp's, you know, Kentucky Wildcats. You know, so it's a true story. So that is I actually own that movie. That's for me. It's one of my favorites. But I don't know if I would say it's the greatest, you know, sports movie out there. So
I think for me, one of my favorites, and I like fundamentally know it's not one of the greatest, but I love some Coach Carter.
That's a classic. That's a classic.
I just love that one.
I own that one too. Okay. So, you know, I'll give you that.
Sleep on that one.
They really do. Listen.
Yeah.
That's so a good one.
So good. All right, Leith, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for wading through some technical difficulty and spending a late night with me, chopping it up about some sports. This is great.
No, this was so fun. Thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to this. So like I said before we started, it's really fun to be on this side of the podcast. Right. But just get to chop it up and talk about some really hard stuff and talk about some good stuff too and some sports. So thanks for having me on. I
appreciate you, friend. Again, y'all got to check out the Roll Down. They just dropped a new episode 12 today, Wednesday when we're recording. Go check them all out. Just do it. Her and Matthew.
We got a dope series coming up after this too. I just want to plug that.
You want to say what it is?
In the Valley.
In the Valley.
So we're going to be talking about suffering and God. So what it looks like to have a theological framework of suffering with our friend Emma Tautolo. And then we got Dr. Soong-Chan Ra talking about lament and justice in the midst of the valley. So it's based out of Psalm 23. And then we had the awesome privilege to chat with Cole Arthur Riley, the brilliance behind Black Liturgies on Instagram, talking about joy and rest in the valley. We talked to her, yesterday, and that was like, my mind is still kind of blown. Like, I can't wait for the episode to come out so I can listen to it again. And then Matthew and I are going to talk about our own stories and perseverance and probably like endurance in the midst of the valley. So a lot of people want to put a timeline on your grief and your pain in the midst of suffering, and God doesn't do that. And so we talk about a lot of that. So that's coming up on the podcast. So awesome. I'm excited about it.
I'll be checking that out for sure. All right, Lee, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Talk to you later. Peace. Thank you all again so much for listening. This podcast was created to elevate the voices of people of color and to invite our allies and anyone else to listen in, learn, and grow with us. Our artwork was created by the great Ashley Bush, and the music you're listening to was written and produced by the also great Dylan Dent.